Hi, and thanks for joining us today. I'm Jason Kent, the co-chair of Cooley's Public Companies Practice Group, and I'm joined today by Beth Sassafy. We're very excited to have Beth join us as a partner in New York recently, where she will lead and expand our ESG Advisory Practice. Beth was most recently the Senior Vice President Governance and Chief Sustainability Officer at Verizon. Welcome, Beth.
Thanks, Jason.
Just to get started, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background? How did you get started in the ESG space, and what ultimately led you to carve out a career in ESG and governance?
Well, like all great things, it kind of happened by accident. So I'd been at Verizon working in the litigation team for a number of years, and I had been advising the board on a variety of litigation matters and ended up kind of attaching myself to the Corporate Governance and Policy Committee and spending time with the board leadership and understanding how committees worked and thinking through things like fiduciary duty. And a corporate governance and policy role opened up at the company, and they asked me to step into it. And at that time, ESG wasn't really a thing, but we were doing ESG. Verizon had a lot of shareholder proposals. We had a lot of large investors who were talking to us about issues like DEI and climate in the context of shareholder proposals and reporting. And so we started kind of down that path. And about 3 years ago, our board decided it would make a lot of sense to build out a centralized ESG function. And so they tapped me to do that, given kind of where I was sitting and what sort of expertise I had. And in addition to kind of the reporting and engagement functions, we pulled in some key groups under me: human rights, digital trust and safety, to make sure that some of the key business areas were really cared for and we could integrate ESG into our business ops.
So you had clearly carved out a great career at Verizon, but to our benefit, we managed to convince you to come join us as a partner at Cooley. Tell us about your thought process there. What attracted you to Cooley and the opportunity here?
Yeah, so, when we think about ESG, everybody thinks about the investor space. But in the last year for me at Verizon, I was spending also a lot of time with customers of all shapes and sizes, all different locations, all different industries. And they were coming to me to talk a lot about, how do we build out an ESG program? Where should this sit? How do we get good data? And I really enjoy that kind of counseling function. It allows you to be really creative. Which I am, and I think is the great thing about this space. And so when Cooley approached me, I thought it was a perfect fit. You've got an amazing platform of companies in all stages, public and private, who really, I think, are hungry for advice and practical advice, right, as to how they can build ESG programs and think about reputational risk.
Great. So Beth, ESG is as hot a topic as it's ever been. And obviously we're seeing everything from SEC mandates to investor requirements, and even more recently, the emergence of the so-called anti-ESG movement. If I was to ask you to share a speech on the state of ESG today, what would you say?
I would say that ESG is undergoing some growing pains, right? And that is not a surprise to me. You had just a rapid adoption of ESG over a very short period of time, where I think no one knew exactly what it was and exactly how to think about it. And so I think what you're seeing now is a bit of a course correction in terms of companies being able to talk about what ESG risks and priorities are essential for them to focus on in order to create long-term sustainable business value. And thinking about measuring the impact that ESG can have on a company, it's challenging to do, right? So I think that's evolving. Similarly, I think investors are being pushed to articulate how they think about ESG, what it means, why they're asking for certain data, how they're going to use it, what's decision useful. So I think the more we have those conversations in this space, the less the politicization is going to matter. And the more folks are going to understand, listen, you can call it whatever you want, right? The acronym's really loaded right now. But the bottom line is, any investor, any stakeholder worth their salt is going to expect a company to care for some non-financial issues, right? Take cybersecurity. You're going to want to understand board oversight in the area. You're going to understand what the management and governance structure looks like. You want a company to be able to articulate how it's managing risk in that area, and what KPIs are they thinking about to measure, right, success and progress in the area. So it doesn't need to be such a loaded exercise. And I think hopefully the state today is going to kind of find its way to the middle.
So looking to the year ahead, Beth, what should our public company clients be thinking about as key areas of focus when it comes to ESG?
So I think our public company clients need to be really focused on the regulatory tsunami that's coming down the pike. You've got a number of rulemakings coming out of the SEC on things like climate, cybersecurity, human capital, board diversity. There are a lot of rulemakings coming out of Europe, which may or may not affect companies directly. But indirectly, I think what you're going to see is a lot of companies are going to have to produce a lot of data, either for their customers, their suppliers, to kind of make sure that everybody can care for the various restrictions that are on them and the compliance demands that are coming. Another area really is shareholder engagement. I think we're seeing more and more ESG related proposals, and also just things like media campaigns every day. And so I think the public companies need to give a lot of thought to their engagement programs. And also their boards need to think about when companies speak and if there are kind of guardrails around what they're doing and making sure that they're protected there. And then the other area I think we're going to see a lot of attention for public companies is in enforcement, right? So we're starting to see SEC enforcement. The FTC is starting to look at the use of words like green or environmentally friendly, right? And then you're also going to see some class actions coming down the pike as well as investors and others start focusing on greenwashing. And then, of course, making sure that they're thinking about how to talk about the impact of ESG on their business so that they can kind of protect themselves and navigate this highly politicized environment.
Got it. Certainly a lot to think about for public companies
Absolutely.
In the coming year. Let's just pivot and talk about private companies. Mm-hmm. So I think historically people have thought about ESG as something that is really only in the realm of public companies, but we're seeing a greater reach into the private company world now. What should private companies be thinking about, maybe even if they're just thinking about ESG or considering ESG for the first time?
Yeah, I think private companies need to start thinking about an ESG strategy, because even though a lot of the regulatory mandates aren't going to touch them directly, they are going to have to produce ESG data and ESG policies to a lot of their customers. What we're seeing now is customers asking private companies for contract terms, frankly, that talk about, making sure you're adhering to a code of conduct. What are you doing in your supply chain? Are you producing your emissions to us? We may need them, public company says, because we've got a report, right? And so we need to understand what you're doing. So I think there's kind of that indirect link. But I also think, employees are going to demand that a lot of companies have an ESG story and that they can talk transparently about their ESG goals and commitments. So you've got kind of a talent attraction and retention angle there. And then I think we're seeing a lot of private equity funds and other investors focus on the allocation of capital and being very articulate about what they expect in the area of ESG from some private companies. So I think the private companies can take an initial step, put a toe in the water. I'd put together like a cross-functional team to kind of assess where they are and what they think they've got. And then maybe thinking about what the 3 or 4 key areas are that touch their business strategy that they should start thinking about.
Yeah, you make an interesting point about private equity funds and investors and their mandates for private companies, because we are seeing that a lot in investment transactions where the investors will make it a term of the investment, a contractual term, which is frankly something that a public company investor can't necessarily do because they don't have that sort of direct relationship with the company. So,
exactly.
Yeah, so great advice. Look, Beth, this has all been really helpful. Is there anything else that you'd like to share as you start off at Cooley and begin to lead and expand our ESG practice?
I just want to say how thrilled I am to be here, and that, I'm really impressed with the support of the partnership and the firm, and that ESG is a team sport. It's cross-functional. We need everyone to participate. So I'm thrilled that y'all are helping kind of from day one set this up.
That's great. Thank you, Beth, for your guidance today. We look forward to your input for many years to come. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Jason.